My father-in-law took an instant dislike to my daughter's boyfriend and refused to include him at Christmas. What followed was a family blow-up over lying to our daughter, standing our ground, and finally choosing sides. This is a long drama-filled tale, so buckle in. For background, our daughter and her BF, let's call him Dan, moved in together in August. It was fast. They'd only been together for 6 months, but they're old enough to make that decision and are discussing marriage. I fully believe they're going to end up together. Dan had to move away for training this month, so they're going to be long distance for a little while, but plan to live together as soon as they're in the same city again. Now, my FIL can be a lot. He's your typical rich old white guy who's used to getting his way. He and my MIL visited my daughter in November, and for some reason FIL took an unreasonable dislike to Dan. No reason was given, he just doesn't like him. Personally, I think it may be because they moved in together so quickly and/or because Dan is a POC, our family is white, but FIL would never admit it. So here's where it gets sticky. Dan will be spending Christmas with our immediate family at our house. His parents will be away, and he was going to be alone, so of course we invited him to stay with us. As far as we're concerned, he's going to be family, and we treat him as such. Now, my in-laws live about 2 hours away. Typically, we would do an overnight visit at their house for the holidays, and we're planning one when we invited Dan to stay with us. My partner was on the phone with his dad ironing out details, and he told his father about Dan staying with us. My partner was very careful to say he understood that it was his parents' decision whether they wanted to include Dan or not. It honestly never occurred to me that they'd leave him out. Well, my FIL had a hissy fit. Said he didn't want that boy, he's 24, in his house. Didn't discuss it with his wife, who loves Dan, just flat out refused to include him. My partner, and I'm so proud of him for this, told his dad that Dan would be staying with us and part of our holiday plans. He agreed that of course his dad had a right to decide who to have in his home, and he wasn't going to push. He suggested his parents could talk about it separately, like not while on the phone with him, before making any final decisions. Then, he suggested that if Phil truly didn't want Dan in his house, we could all meet for lunch or dinner halfway between our houses, all including Dan. It did not go over well. My FIL immediately became defensive and snapped about how it was his house and his choice, and he didn't need to talk to his wife. His word was final. He's that guy. The hilarious part to me is my in-laws are devout Christians. So much for the season of love and acceptance, right? Anyway, my dilemma is how to address this with our daughter and Dan. I'm furious and disgusted with my Phil's behavior, and if it were up to me, I'd tell her exactly what her grandfather said, and that he told us Dan isn't welcome. But my partner says he'd rather just tell our daughter the overnight visit didn't work out so she doesn't get mad at her grandparents. I disagree. I think she should know the truth and get mad if she wants to. I know I am. So my question is this: how would you address it with your daughter? Personally, I don't care if she gets angry because of the truth, but these aren't my parents and I want to respect my partner as well. What would you do? Edit. Holy crap, this got bigger than I expected. I'm reading every comment and will respond as much as I can. Thanks. Edit 2 for clarity. My partner and I are married. I just tend to call them my partner instead of husband. Also, I should add that my FIL does refer to my BIL as that boy as well, and my BIL is white. That's part of why I'm not sure if Phil's dislike of Dan is race-related. Edit 3 because it's coming up a lot. We aren't going to the in-laws even if FIL changes his mind. Lunch is still being debated. Update 1. If you missed the original, to sum up, my FIL took an unreasonable and unexplained dislike to our daughter's live in BF and won't have him at his house for Christmas. Dan, the BF, is spending Christmas with our family in our home, and we aren't comfortable excluding him from an overnight trip to my in-laws. We suggested meeting them for lunch instead, including Dan. That's still up for debate. The issue is what we tell our daughter about why the visit to our in-laws was canceled. My husband wants to tell her the dates just didn't work out. I want to tell her the truth, specifically that she should ask her grandfather why. On to the update. I've gotten a lot more responses to my first post than I expected, so I thought I should update. Since my original post, I've had several conversations with my husband, none of which have gone well. I've explained I'm not comfortable with the lie of omission, only telling our daughter the date didn't work out, and feel she should be told to ask her grandfather why we won't be going. My husband still disagrees. He maintains that he's protecting her. I'm still arguing that he's protecting his father, and therefore rewarding his behavior. He argues that my in-laws missing our overnight visit is the consequence. I finally told him I won't be lying to our daughter. If she asks me why we aren't going, I'm going to tell her she needs to talk to her grandfather about that. He can explain his decision to her. While I want to simply tell her, Phil said Dan isn't welcome, I'm not doing his dirty work for him. Frankly, I'm going to make sure she asks me because I'm not okay with her and Dan attending a lunch with someone who doesn't approve of Dan. It doesn't matter what my Phil's reasoning is. She has a right to know, and he has a responsibility to tell her himself. She can then make an informed decision about whether they want to attend. And even more honestly, if they don't go, I don't go. She needs to know I back her unreservedly. Right now, things at home are icy between my husband and I have no idea how this will turn out. I'll update again once there's more info. Edit. I'm in absolute shock over the response these posts are getting. 600,000 people have read them. Mind blown. Thank you so much for all your input. I'm keeping up with replies as best I can. Relevant comments. Does OP's husband really like Dan? Is there a chance that he agrees with his dad? OP. I know my husband doesn't like Dan quite as much as I do, but we've talked about it at length because I was afraid of the same thing. His hesitation is all about how long they've been together, and the fact that he's dating our daughter. He'd react to anyone she dates the same way. He's actually nicer to Dan than he was to her last partner, and they dated for almost 2 years, so I don't think he agrees with his dad. Commenter 1. Did your Phil know prior to the November visit that Dan and your daughter were living together? If he did, his dislike of Dan must be based on race or something Dan did during that visit. OP. He knew before they went, but after they booked the trip, so they could have canceled. Money isn't an issue for them. Commenter 2. Yes, you should tell your daughter. Stick to the facts. Don't editorialize. The facts are bad enough. Don't make her go to her grandfather for information unless you know. I feel sorry for here is your husband. He knows what his father is. He's caught directly in between his father and your daughter. Clearly his father is in the wrong, no doubt, and your husband is having a hard time accepting that his dad is butthead. Look, I'm the same gender, race, and probably the same age as the grandfather in this situation. Your original post said, for some reason Phil took an unreasonable dislike to Dan. I'd want to know the reason beyond all doubt. Hypocrisy and bigoted stubbornness makes my blood boil, so I'd want to know if it was racially based or if there is some other reason. Before talking with your daughter, finding out the reason for his position, even if it means talking with him directly yourself. OP. I feel sorry for my husband too, because not only is he stuck between his dad and daughter, he also has me arguing with him. I'd love to know the reason for Phil's dislike as well. If Dan said or did something unforgivable, I'd like to know. But the thing is, Dan is lovely and has been nothing but polite, kind, and trying almost too hard with my husband and I can't imagine why he'd act any differently with her grandparents. All I can think is that his dislike stems from the fact that they lived together without being married, moved in together so quickly, and Dan didn't have a job when they met. I don't want to think it could be racially motivated, but it's a possibility. I'd also love to ask my Phil myself, but my husband would never forgive me if I did. So frustrating. If OP's daughter and Dan gets married, would Phil approve him? OP. I don't know. I hope, if Phil's around that long, he'll get to know him and we'll see what a great guy he is. It'd be nice for our daughter if her grandfather approved, but frankly, whether he does or not won't change anything for her. She's never needed anyone's approval to make these kinds of decisions. Pretty proud of her for that. Mama brag for the day. Update 2. Well, here we go again. If you missed part 1 and 2, here's a quick summary. My daughter and her BF Dan live together. Dan is spending Christmas at our house. Our family was supposed to visit our in-laws at their house overnight. Phil doesn't want my daughter's BF to come to his house for Christmas. We won't go if Dan isn't included and suggested we all meet for lunch instead. That's still being discussed. My husband wanted to tell my daughter we weren't going because we couldn't settle on a time and date. I wanted to tell her that Phil didn't want to include Dan. We argued. I told my husband I wouldn't lie to our daughter and planned to tell her to ask her grandfather why plans derailed. On to the update, and it's a long one. My mind is still blown by the number of people who've read these posts. At the moment it's over 1 million. I had no idea people would be so invested in this stupid little story of family drama, but I'm still getting a lot of messages, so I thought I'd add what's happened in the last day. I haven't had a chance to talk to my daughter yet. We were supposed to chat yesterday but weren't able to, so that conversation is on hold. I did, however, talk to my husband again. We got a lot deeper into his thinking on what's happening, and I have to say I was surprised. He's more upset than I thought he was about the situation. He was very angry at his father. The fact that my FIL apparently rejected Dan for no good reason infuriates him. He confirmed he, my husband himself, likes Dan and didn't understand why his father was acting this way. So no, my husband doesn't share his father's views. My husband talked about how hard it's been all his life to have to be the mediator in his family. As many suspected, this is a role he's played for a long time. It's always been his job to pat things down between his parents, between his siblings and parents, even between his parents and I. My husband's family is extremely conflict avoidant, and somehow he took on the responsibility for keeping it to a minimum between family members. He hates it, but says he feels stuck. I knew this about them, but didn't realize just how bad it was. So we talked about it, and I think both of us felt better afterwards. But that's not the real update. Apparently, after our last conversation, he did talk to his dad again. I know a bunch of you are waiting in the wings to scream, "Feels a racist," and I'm sorry to disappoint, but that isn't the problem. And no, Dan, our daughter's BF, isn't a con man and didn't say anything unforgivable. My FL is just a grumpy old man who thinks young people shouldn't be living in sin. That's a direct quote. Now, before anyone suggests FL is lying, because I thought that too, my husband did ask his dad directly if the fact that Dan is a POC had anything to do with Phil's dislike. When I suggested this as a possibility to my husband, he didn't think so, but wasn't 100% sure. Well, apparently my FIL was horrified. He asked my husband if he'd said or done anything to give us or Dan that idea. And when we talked about it after their conversation yesterday, frankly, neither of us could come up with anything specific other than the boy comment, that FIL didn't want that boy to come for Christmas. As I said in my other posts, that was my suspicion, and I take full responsibility for it. In my head, I put too much emphasis on Phil calling Dan that boy, assuming it was racist. As I said in both my other posts, my FL refers to my white brother-in-law as that boy as well, so I'm the one who added the meaning, and I'm the one who suggested it to my husband. I feel awful, and I apologize if I misled anyone. That was never my intention. I really did think my FIL could be a bigot. I'm ashamed, to be honest, because it was one stupid sentence in almost 30 years of knowing him. I made a mistake, and I've apologized to my husband. And yes, I'll apologize to my FIL. While they were talking, my FIL actually offered to speak directly to Dan and our daughter if they thought this, and my husband explained that no, we were the ones who suspected his issue could be racially motivated. His dad is understandably angry that we could think that of him, and I have damage control to do. I'll be calling my FIL today to apologize for that and talk about what's happening. But back to the reason FIL doesn't want Dan in his house for Christmas. He doesn't approve of Dan and our daughter living together. He says they're too young, it was too fast, and since they aren't even engaged, it isn't appropriate. As I've said before, my in-laws are devout Christians, so the living in sin aspect is very real to them. I swear the man is still living in the 60s. But that's his main issue. As an extension of that, he thinks they moved in together too quickly. I can see why he'd think that. They only dated for 6 months before, but they've been together for a year now and are talking about marriage. My daughter says it will happen. They're just waiting until they're both finished their training. Both already have degrees, this is professional training, to make it official. My father-in-law didn't know that. In addition, FIL was under the impression that Dan had been freeloading off our daughter because when my in-laws visited them, Dan didn't have a job. Well, Dan was paying his own way with his savings while he waited for his full-time vocational training to start. Dan's actually moved for that, so he and our daughter will be long distance until he starts his very secure full-time job. FIL didn't know that either. So does he approve of Dan now? No. He's still got to stick up his nether regions that they were living together before marriage. Is he now willing to host Dan for the overnight visit? Also no. He still disapproves of their choices. Is he a racist jerk? Also no. Just an old-fashioned 80-year-old who doesn't understand the world has changed. That's where we stand. We still aren't going to the in-laws for Christmas. Dan still isn't welcome at my in-laws, but now we know why. And what are we going to say to our daughter? The truth. That her grandfather isn't comfortable having Dan stay overnight when they aren't engaged. That it's his house and we have to respect that. that we're going to try to meet for lunch instead, and she and Dan are welcome to join us, and we'll let them decide. I'll be suggesting she talk to her grandfather directly. I don't know if I'll be updating again. It depends on how the conversations with my daughter and FIL go. Thanks everyone for reading. Final update. This will be the final update in the saga of the Great Christmas In-Law Invite debacle. If you're just joining us now, here's what's already happened. My daughter lives with her BF Dan. Dan's parents are away this Christmas and he'll be spending the holiday with our immediate family in our home. We would normally go spend a night with my in-laws over Christmas, and we're planning this when it came out that Dan would be alone. So we asked him to join us at our home. When my father-in-law was asked if Dan was welcome at their house as well, we were told no. That father-in-law didn't want him there for Christmas. We offered to meet them for lunch instead. My original post asked if I should 1. Tell our daughter why we wouldn't be going to her grandparents, that FIL wasn't comfortable hosting Dan. 2. Suggest she talk to her grandfather directly, or 3. Just say it didn't work out. The overwhelming response was to tell her. I decided not to lie to her and say she should speak to her grandfather. Now, because of FIL's wording, calling Dan a boy, and the fact that Dan is a POC, I wrongly assumed the refusal could be because of Dan's skin color. During a second conversation with my husband, my FIL clarified his problem with Dan wasn't his race, but that one. They, our daughter and Dan, lived together and weren't married. 2. That they moved in together so quickly and weren't even engaged. And 3. That Dan was sponging off our daughter because he didn't have a job. FIL was told that 1. They planned to get married. 2. They'd known each other since middle school. And 3. Dan paid his own way. I apologized to my husband for misunderstanding and suggesting his dad was a bigot, and planned to do the same with my FIL. We also planned to tell our daughter the truth. Now, finally, the update. First, the conversation with my FIL. It was short and mostly cordial. I apologized for assuming his boy comment meant he had an issue with a POC dating his granddaughter. I explained that the term is often considered a slur against POC, hence my reaction. He grudgingly accepted my apology. He pointed out that that's what he calls my BIL too, who, incidentally, is white, and he didn't think it meant anything other than a male younger than himself. As a few people suggested, I pointed out that even if he didn't intend it to be an insult, it still was one. He sounded surprised and asked if I thought my BIL was offended when he called him that. I asked if he'd ever called Bill that to his face, and he went very quiet. So I pointed out that if he, FIL, didn't think it was an insult, why didn't he openly call Bill that? He sort of harumphed and muttered something about how people are too sensitive, but I'm pretty sure he got it. We moved on. I then asked if Dan was welcome in his house at all or just not overnight. That really seemed to surprise him because he said of course Dan could visit, just not sleep over. So that was a relief. He then said that we jumped to suggesting a lunch so quickly, he didn't have a chance to suggest we just visit for the day. Talk about miscommunication. So the call ended with us agreeing that this year meeting in a neutral restaurant was for the best and we'd plan better for next year. If Dan's still around, he felt the need to add. But he ended the call by saying he missed us and was looking forward to lunch. So all good there. Then the talk with our daughter. She brought up the visit herself and asked when we were going to her grandparents. Her dad and I had agreed on our response, which was we were going to meet halfway for lunch instead. She was disappointed and asked why. As gently as possible, I told her not everyone is comfortable with having someone they don't know very well staying in their home. Before I could say anything else about my FIL's reaction, she made me laugh by asking if Grandpa still had a stick up his ass about her and Dan living together. Everyone who said she already knew was spot on. Then we had a bit of a giggle about old-fashioned values and how not everyone thinks the way do. We talked about how people react when a relationship moves so fast, her father's and mine did too, and that attitudes change in time, and that Grandpa just didn't know Dan yet. I let her know I wasn't invited to sleep over until her dad and I were engaged either, and that helped. She laughed and said at least her grandfather's consistent. Then I reminded her that her dad and I support her, and them, 100%, and she said she knew that, and that was about it. I'm sure some people will be disappointed that there wasn't a big explosive confrontation where we cut Phil out of our lives because he's a secret member of a white supremacist group. But that's just not what happened. There was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, and some judgmental attitudes from both my FIL and I. We're still going to see my in-laws, and Dan will be coming. It just won't be overnight, and things are okay with us and our daughter and with us and our FIL. As to FIL's relationship with our daughter, we're leaving it to them. This will be the final update because the issue is basically resolved. Thanks again to everyone who commented, yes, even the people who told me I should divorce my bigot husband. That made me laugh a little. And I got some great advice. It was fun to read the responses, and the reaction still blows me away. So cheers, and that's all folks. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.